Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be talking about astrology and sports celebrities. Now, the first thing I look at as far as affinity for sports and athletics is Aries, Leo, or Sagittarius dominant in one's chart or prominent anyway. Now, Mars and or Jupiter, well aspected, can play a role, I believe, in athletic prowess and affinity for sports. Now, legendary NBA player Michael Jordan has the moon in Sagittarius in his sixth house of employment and daily routine. It is also the ruler of his ascendant. Now, his Sagittarius moon also makes a trine to his Mars in Leo. Now, he has Jupiter in its dignity in Pisces, conjuncts his MC, and it also is involved in a grand water trine configuration. Now, he also has a mystic rectangle configuration, which is auspicious, of course, for utilizing abilities and being able to capitalize on capabilities that you may have, and in his particular case, obviously ones that are connected with his natural athletic prowess and ability. Michael Jordan, as many of you may know, is seen almost unequivocally as the greatest NBA player that ever lived. So anyway, well, another thing too is, you look for these grand fire trine configurations seems to pop up in a number of very prominent and successful athletes. Now, you look at all-time Major League Baseball hits leader Pete Rose has a grand fire trine configuration involving his moon in Sagittarius, Mercury in Aries, and Pluto in Leo. College football phenom Tim Tebow likely has a grand fire trine configuration depending on birth time. He likely has his moon in Aries, Sun-Mars conjunction in Leo, and Uranus in Sagittarius, and that, of course, the Uranus in Sag can factor into perhaps unusual athletic ability. Now, interesting too is that Aries is the sign that is synonymous with number 1. You look at Pete Rose, Sun ascendant in Aries. He's the all-time, as I stated before, Major League Baseball hits leader. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Sun in Aries. All-time NBA points leader. Peyton Manning, Sun in Aries. If I'm not mistaken, all-time leader in NFL touchdown passes and yards thrown. So, now a thing about athletes too, another sign that I think is interesting, you don't really see Aquarius as a sign that's really connected with sports, but the ones that do play can often be very revolutionary, and they could really, they could be the most some of the most transcendent athletes and really ahead of their time. I mean, you look at a number of Aquarius athletes, you look at Hall of Fame NFL running back Jim Brown's son in Aquarius. I mean, people had stated when he played, at least one person said, I mean, he was just like, I mean, his physique was almost like some kind of bodybuilder, and what he did on that field, I mean, he was just such a dominant running back, and his ability just seems so much, it just surpassed, it seemed like, so many people in that particular time when he played. You look at another Aquarius athlete, was Babe Ruth's son in Aquarius. I mean, you talk about things that he did that was so transcendent. I mean, he was out homering baseball teams. I mean, basically brought the home run ball very strongly into Major League Baseball. And what was interesting about what he did, what made his accomplishments perhaps even greater, he was doing it, and at least for part of the time he played, the country was going through, United States was going through a depression, and it was a very despondent period, and he really helped I mean, revive spirits in the United States, along as maybe perhaps he may have even revived the game of a baseball to some degree and enlivened it. Now, another person too, you talk about an Aquarius athlete, was the late great iconic boxer Muhammad Ali. He had his moon in Aquarius. I mean, he was just such a, not, I mean, the Leo ascendant helped him, you know, when the way he won was in such dominating fashion and had a flamboyant style. But the Aquarius moon might have played a role in just how, I mean, the fact that he brought such a unique quality and it had enabled him to emerge victorious on so many occasions. I mean, the fact that he was so much faster than a lot of these other fighters that he would, I mean, he would be throwing punches at such a fast rate. His speed, his agility, his basketball IQ. I think he's still, I mean, I mean, he's been gone for some years and out of boxing for many years, but I still see him as the greatest boxer that ever lived. So, I mean, one of the most cerebral as well. So, anyway, well, the next thing I want to talk about is somebody that's prominent in the sports world, but he is not not an athlete, but an announcer, very prolific announcer. You may have heard of him, Joe Buck. Now, he likely has a Grand Fire Trine configuration in his chart, depending on time of birth. Now, that would involve the Moon in Leo, Venus in Aries, and Mars in Sagittarius. Now, he also has his Sun and Mercury in Taurus. I mean, you hear the term golden throat connected with the sign. I think the Sun and Mercury in Taurus is really why I believe he has a very resonant and very mellifluous, like, radio announcer voice. He's got one of the best voices I have ever heard for announcer. And his Mercury in Taurus is likely at 21 or 22 degrees, thus making it perhaps more pronounced and prominent. Now, it's funny, a story with Joe Buck. I think astrology can very well have a sense of humor. Buck was doing some kind of telecast one time for a football game one day, and he made a comment regarding NFL quarterback Aaron Rodgers, stating something about Rodgers having perseverance. Now, Aaron Rodgers, interestingly enough, he has 5 degrees Taurus rising. And Joe Buck likely has his Sun in Taurus at 5 degrees. Now, Taurus is the sign, of course, synonymous with perseverance. I think Joe Buck would obviously know something about that, but yet at the same time, he's talking about Rodgers, a Taurus ascendant, having good powers of perseverance or what have you, whatever exact words he used. I don't know, but I know he said he showed perseverance. So anyway. Now, another thing too, I thought, I mean, you look at this as well, and it's interesting to look at the synastry of some sports athletes. Now, there was obviously blatant animosity that existed between iconic, revered NBA players Michael Jordan and Reggie Miller. Michael Jordan's Cancer ascendant makes a close opposition to Miller's Capricorn ascendant. Jordan obviously didn't appreciate perhaps Miller's somewhat callous and insensitive Capricorn front that he was projecting, and Jordan had reacted sensitively on at least one occasion. Many of you sports fans out there may have remembered Miller he got to Jordan one time, perhaps with persistent goading or what have you, and Jordan wound up punching him, I think it was in the mouth, in one basketball game. And the thing about this too is what I thought was interesting. I mean, looking at him, as adversarial as they may have been on the court, I looked at Jordan's Venus in Capricorn makes a close conjunction to Reggie Miller's ascendant. Maybe this was like that love, that guy he loved to hate, maybe. But I wonder if maybe indirectly, somehow unwittingly, inadvertently, or what have you, maybe Jordan played a role maybe in Reggie Miller as far as his own revenue in his financial acumen. You figure, well, how could that possibly be? Well, maybe the rivalry, that connection through that rivalry he had with Jordan, the animosity and drama associated with him with Jordan, maybe that led to greater popularity in some odd way and might have maybe given Miller some more endorsements, for example. So anyway, another thing to talk about as far as NBA rivalries, what's interesting, you go a little bit back, long-time NBA fans out there, the older people may remember Bill Russell and the Wilt Chamberlain rivalry. Now, Bill Russell, has his son in Aquarius, and Wilt Chamberlain had his son in Leo, and their sons made an opposition to each other. And they had gone at it a number of times in NBA Finals, and I believe Russell, emerged victorious every single time, if I'm not mistaken. You could go check on that to make sure, but I believe he did. And the thing about it is, you look at the energies of Aquarius and Leo, and maybe what I think may have factored in. See, Bill Russell is seen by many, I would agree, as far as prominent basketball players, perhaps the best NBA player that played, as far as playing collectively, the best NBA team player perhaps that ever lived. And you had Wilt Chamberlain, who was such a dominant force. He was someone obviously to be reckoned with, very formidable, of course. And he put up numbers like there was no tomorrow. Some people may think that he's actually the greatest basketball player that ever lived. But the thing about it was perhaps some of the differences in the fact that Russell emerged victorious in these NBA title matchups against Chamberlain's teams. Could it have been perhaps that Bill Russell was showing the more selfless qualities of Aquarius and playing for more, putting more of the team concept, incorporating more of the team concept into the game, as opposed to Chamberlain, who may have just been, maybe somewhat a little bit egocentric, or just playing, being a dominant player and everything, but not really being maybe the best team player, and really maybe that had something to do with the way Russell had beaten Wilt Chamberlain so many times in NBA Finals. So anyway, well, another thing I want to talk about is is another person that is not an athlete, but he is a famous writer. He's a writer, sports columnist. Mike Lupica has the moon in Sagittarius, Mercury in Aries, and he also has a Pluto in Leo. It could be a grand fire trine configuration depending on time, and he also has Jupiter making a conjunction to that Mercury, so that could give more luck and make it very fortuitous perhaps for writing ability and being very proficient in writing. So the thing is too, you also have an athlete with what I want to talk about as well. Here's another example of an athlete, who likely has a grand fire trine configuration, is NHL National Hockey League legend Gordie Howe, who has moon in his chart. He has the moon in Leo, the Jupiter in Aries, and Saturn in Sagittarius likely make that grand fire trine configuration, and of course depending on birth time. And and the Saturn in Sagittarius likely could have played a role in his strong longevity in the game. Now, another athlete too, this one didn't have Aries, Leo, or Sagittarius prominent, but you talk about a very versatile, multifaceted athlete, Jim Thorpe. Now, the thing about him is, though, as I stated before, he may not have Aries, Leo, or Sagittarius prominent in his chart, but Mars makes a plethora of aspects in his chart. I believe at least 7 aspects in it. And the thing about it is, it's also with the Gemini Sun and Ascendant, it's not bewildering that he was talented in so many different sports. Now, Mars, obviously, I would consider that a planet in high focus in his chart, considering all the aspects that it made. Now, I want to talk about a couple of very famous, memorable sports events. Now, you look at on March 2nd, 1962, NBA legend Wilt Chamberlain scored an unprecedented 100 points against the New York Knicks. Now, at that time that this occurred, Mars was conjunct Jupiter in Aquarius, in Wilt's 10th house of notoriety and recognition. Now, luck obviously could play a role, and something unusual happened that was sports related. And also, he demonstrated an uncanny amount of energy. Wilt played all 48 minutes in that game. Interestingly enough, the chart that is used, which is on Astro.com, has him at Taurus rising. And I mean, if that, assuming that that chart is correct, I mean, you look at Taurus, people are obviously, they could have very strong latent energy and have very strong endurance. So it wasn't even shocked. I mean, the fact that Wilt played 48 minutes, I'm sure he did that a number of times in other games that he played, or at least close to the full time of the game. Now, the second thing I want to talk about, as far as memorable sports events and correlation perhaps with some astrological energy and transits, you look at the Buster Douglas fight against Mike Tyson, which took place on February 11th, 1990. Buster Douglas was a 42-1 underdog, and he overcame seemingly insurmountable odds to win this fight. And at that time, I mean, he defeated a seemingly invincible Mike Tyson. Uranus at the time was conjunct Mars in Capricorn, and this could suggest something unpredictable may happen in the sports world. Now, in Capricorn, perhaps it shows how Douglas was able to emerge victorious using consistent disciplined energy. Interestingly enough, Neptune was about 4 degrees from Mars at the time, so maybe, and there was some controversy in the fight. There was something in the fight which was left a little bit nebulous and unclear. You look at, there was, if I'm not mistaken, Buster Douglas had been knocked down at one point in the fight by Mike Tyson, and what it was is, if I remember this correctly now, the count, you're supposed to get up by the 10 count in boxing after you're knocked down. If you're not up by the count of 10, it's a knockout. But what happened was Buster Douglas got up at 9 or something, that the count was right before 10. But there's a number of people that think that the referee counted too slow, and if he counted at the right rate, going from 1 to 10, that Buster Douglas would not have gotten up by the count of 10. So there was a little controversy in there, and I think maybe that Neptune influence could have played a little bit of a role in that. And remember, when you have Neptune energy close to Mars, that could show dissipation and dissolving of energy, and it might have affected Mike Tyson to some degree at that time. So anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment for astrology and sports celebrities. Stay tuned next time, where I'm going to be giving you my Taurus May 2018 horoscope forecast. Two things I want to get with you on before I head out. Firstly, the stars may impel but do not compel. And secondly, never isolate any single astrological element, aspect, planetary placement, position, configuration, influence, or what have you, and make an analysis of a person, astrologically speaking, based on this alone, because astrologically speaking, the person is the sum of all their components in their natal chart, and not just one. Until next time, people, stay well.